Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're recapping season three and the show up to this point. But before we continue, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
Yeah, basically, you can find us everywhere because we are trying to be everywhere. So do find us, follow us, and let us know what you think of the show, or if you have general questions, or just want to get to know us because we are just such awesome people. We promise to be relatively friendly. Um, Now, as David said, this is going to be a recap. We're talking about obviously mainly season three because that's what we just finished watching, but also kind of giving you a story so far and helping to connect the dots of the overall storyline of Deep Space Nine, and also maybe make some projections into the future. What we hope to see in season four. Now, this is going to really be more of a David area than me because I've seen this show so many times. So there's no sense in me really giving a whole lot of projections. I'm just going to kind of play into David's basically here.
Very
So,
good. Very good. Yeah.
um, but before we get into all of that goodness, David, how was your week?
Week's been good. Work has been surprisingly good. It was interesting because we just had the President's Day sale, one of the big sales of the year, and it was kind of a dud. And then a few weeks later, it's like people were like 2 weeks late to the sale. Okay, like all right, good week. Surprised that it was 2 weeks behind what we normally would expect, but all right, whatever. so, yeah. Other than that, life's good. Life's normal. How about you?
Um, Too eventful is how I'm going to describe this past week. Everything from physical injury to various car troubles that took forever to get solved, and of course my daughter turned 8 years old this past week.
Wow.
So we've just had a lot of things all moving all at once here in this last week, which is great considering the week before when we were doing this, I was kind of complaining about how everything's just kind of been really, stable and nothing's happening. I guess this
Mhm.
is my reaping the, what does it say? What do we say? Don't knock it or whatever that is. So I
Yeah.
definitely did, and then got a bunch of things all at once. But I'm glad to be back to doing this and talking about this show that I just love so much. And also, while we talk about this show, we will also be talking about things that are going on in the new Trek verse. There's a lot of stuff that's happening, a lot of references to Deep Space Nine, as a matter of fact. So I can't wait to bring those up for people as well. So we're going to get to that. Um,
Right.
but let's talk about season three. Season three definitely started off with a bang in the biggest way, of course. And I'm talking about the very first episode of season three, which was The Search. And this is where, Cisco and Jake, Nog, and um, uh, Quark had gone into the Gamma Quadrant, and they ended up running afoul in our first encounter with the Jem'Hadar. We have never
Right.
seen them before. And then, of course, we have the Starship Odyssey going into the Gamma Quadrant to rescue them, which ultimately led to the Odyssey's destruction. The
Right.
first big screen explosion, or I guess small screen explosion, of a beloved Galaxy class ship here. Uh, so so, what did you think of this beginning for us in the third season? Our second season, we were kind of starting to see some elements of a lot of different action, but it kind of ended on a bit of a lower note. But then here we come, third season, big splash. What were your first thoughts coming into this? Do you remember?
Yeah. So that episode you just talked about was the episode Jim Hadars. That was the finale of season two, and then season three opens up with the aftermath, and that's yeah. We meet the Defiant. We actually see Cisco piloting,
Yes.
captaining a ship, which I have to say I really like it. It's funny. I think does he cross his legs in the more like the he doesn't do the more manly cross his legs. He does the more feminine version, I think, but he still looks great. You know what I'm
The
talking about?
feminine version? I've
Oh,
never considered
when
this
I
one
was
crossing legs.
when I was a kid, there was someone who made fun of me for crossing my legs in the more feminine style, and ever since then, I've always been sensitive to like how are they crossing their legs? How am I crossing my legs? Am I crossing my legs feminine or am I crossing my legs masculine? I was like,
I've
it's
never. Never thought about
I'm always sensitive to that issue. Anyway, my sidetrack. I was trying to say
it.
Cisco whenever he's in charge of the Defiant. Every episode where the Defiant was brought up and he's captain of that. I mean, he's not technically captain until the finale of season 3, but every time he's in charge on the Defiant, it's always great because it definitely feels like classic Star Trek in terms of that we're getting on a ship and we're doing things and we're having to fight off enemies. Very classic Star Trek. Deep Space Nine, obviously being on a space station, is a different angle on the Star Trek formula, as anyone who can anyone knows that it's obvious. But um,
Doesn't Cisco seem more at home on the Defiant? Like, I mean, I
yes,
enjoy him on the space station because I have a thing about the Cardassian architecture. I know what we're supposed to think of the Cardassians, but I think that they have a very elegant design. But for some reason, and this is not anyone else, but for some reason to me, Cisco always seemed to stand out a bit more in the Cardassian styling than anybody else. But once we get him on the Defiant and we see him sitting on the bridge, he's got his hands,
yes,
together,
I was gonna say,
and
yeah,
the
yeah,
he looks at home. He looks very
yes,
comfortable here, and he
right,
definitely has that aura of command. Like this is where he was supposed to be,
right.
and I really enjoyed that when he first appeared on the Defiant, and we get to kind of see the new ship and everything else. I instantly liked the Defiant. I never had to warm up to that ship like I had to warm up to some of the others, like Voyager, for example. I have to admit, I didn't really like Voyager for like all of the first season of the show. It took a
Right,
while for me to get there, which is weird because I like the Enterprise D like instantly as well.
right.
So, but yeah, the Defiant, I love the compact design. I love that everything is just, it's tight. It's right there. He swivels from the command seat, which is up on this kind of slightly raised platform, which is interesting that they put it there because that actually goes away later, and then you don't
Hmm.
see that anymore. But I like that initial part where it looks like you have to take at least a half step onto up to where the captain's chair is, and then
Right.
yeah, it swivels around to all the other station stuff. So I mean, I
Yeah,
really enjoyed the Defiant a lot.
I like that swivel. Now, remind me, that's kind of how the classic Star Trek setup looked too, right? Where kind of like it
Yes,
was in the center
that's
and it kind
true.
of swiveled around, right?
That's
Yeah,
true. The captain's chair was in the center and it was on its own little, separate area of the bridge. And then you had the helmsman station and the tactical station were directly in front of the captain's chair. And then you had science to his, what is that? I guess it would be science to his right. And then engineering was to his left and communications was behind him. But yeah, and he had
right,
the same kind of swiveling chair. He could turn to any position and give
right,
direct commands that way.
right. Yeah.
But yeah, but then of course, Next Generation kind of broke that up. We've got there's like what is there, 4 or 5 chairs in the
No, I think it's
front. You
just
got
three.
no, you got the three main ones, but then there were like two other chairs that were off to the wings on either side. But they didn't have the back on the chair the way that the three main chairs did. They were more like um 24th century
Benches.
stool equivalents that
Stools.
were
Yeah.
there. And
Okay.
so yeah, there were technically 5 seats right there, but the three were always maintained by Counselor Troy, Picard in the center, and then Riker to his
It
right.
was right. Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
yeah, and then Voyager was a 2-seat position in the middle.
Hmm.
So,
Okay.
and it was so weird because you couldn't really tell which of those was the captain's chair because they were equally in the middle. And there was no clear designation either way until, the captain just sat down and said, "This is the captain's chair." And then that was it, which I think that's part of the reason that I didn't like it because there wasn't anything that clearly designated. Like at any moment, the captain could walk onto the bridge from any particular angle and sit in a seat, and that's the captain's chair because they are the captain. They don't need to have one on that bridge design. It didn't seem like they needed to really have one designated as the captain's chair. I
Right.
didn't like that. I've never liked that. And then all the other shows kind of went back to that framework of the captain's chair is always in the middle and it's either alone or the other chairs around it are designated in such a position that you can clearly tell that the center seat is the captain's chair.
Right.
So I don't know why Voyager is the only one that kind of departed from that. But yeah, all I mean, even Enterprise when they did, the whole Back to the Future, past future tense, whatever the hell you want to call that for a prequel show. Even
Right.
that show, the captain's chair was on its own separate platform, set back from everything else. And then all the shows now, Discovery, Strange New Worlds, all of them, the ships have a center captain's chair, and then the captain's chair is far away from all of the other positions.
Right.
So, yeah, Voyager definitely stands out as having this kind of equal footing seating that, yeah, I don't like. So
Okay.
anyway, the
Yeah.
Defiant's cool. Basically, the Defiant's
Yeah.
cool. That's what I'm gonna say.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear the from you how the shows have made a variations on that
Hmm.
theme. But yeah, I do agree. Yeah, Cisco seems at home on the Defiant, and when we find out in that first episode where we meet the Defiant that he actually kind of helped build the Defiant, he was actually in charge of its production. This is his
Hmm.
baby. I mean, I mean, any captain we've had, of course, their ship is their baby, but this one's a little bit special for the
A
reason
little
he
bit
was
more
there.
intimate, right?
Yeah. And as we talked about, I think it was like 2 episodes ago. Was it the one where was it the last episode or 2 episodes ago where I guess it was the last one where the changeling was in the ship and was was making havoc, and we were exploring the depths of the Defiant, and I was telling you, it was
Hmm.
like the Defiant is much bigger according to this episode than I expected it to be or thought it was. And
Yeah,
then you actually sent me a picture, a text message with several models displaying their actual size compared to each other. And while the Defiant is definitely smaller than the Enterprise by quite a lot, it does still show that actually there is some depth to the Defiant. It actually,
yeah,
my initial thought was Defiant was like maybe a 20-person ship max. Like I thought
yeah. I
when you say a
understand.
stealth ship, I'm talking about like minimal crew and all that. But it's more like this ship is definitely smaller and meant for stealth for sure. But it's not like it's sacrificing it's not a skeleton crew that's running this thing.
No.
It can hold a contingent of people on it.
So so the ship wasn't necessarily built for stealth so much as it was built for combat. The stealth
Sure.
was an added bonus
Yes.
because they got that cloaking device from the Romulans. But
Right.
originally, the Defiant had been constructed with one purpose, which was to combat and defeat the Borg.
Right.
This was again the ship that Cisco was working on, and this is kind of a callback also to what we first learned about him when the show first started back in season one, when he has that infamous meeting with Captain Picard. Captain Picard says how he knows that Cisco has been working away at the Utopia Planitia shipyards for the past 18 months. So following the battle at Wolf 359, Cisco has really just kind of been isolated and just focusing on ship design, not really doing anything else.
Right.
So now here he is. He's getting to bring one of his ideas he was working on all that time ago. He's bringing that to his new place here
Right.
at Deep Space Nine. And yeah, when you look at the comparison of the ships from the Galaxy class Enterprise D to the Defiant was stripped down, and it's designed again to be a combat vessel. So all the luxuries and things like that that we were really just kind of used to from the Enterprise D, none of that is here.
Right.
Um, I don't. I think that they have like one holodeck on the Defiant. I'll have to double check that to be sure. But even then, it's only supposed to be used for like training and things like that.
Right.
It's not like the luxury thing that it is on the Enterprise D. And there's multiple holodecks on the Enterprise. Plus,
Yeah.
the Enterprise has arboretums and gyms and various bars, and they've got a barber on station on the ship, and they've got all these other amenities that there's just absolutely no room for any of that. The Defiant is designed to be, you know, definitely more on the military end than the paramilitary that we're supposed to think of Starfleet as being. And there was obviously a need for that. Again, fighting the Borg. The Borg were the biggest threat that we had in the at the time when that ship was going into construction, and they didn't want to put families. And again, this still tells us a lot about Cisco because he was the one who designed it. What happened to him at Wolf 359? He lost his
Yeah.
family.
Right.
He barely escaped with his son. So
Right.
all of his thinking of designing a ship was make it the toughest, meanest, baddest thing that I possibly can to make it a true threat to the Borg, but also to eliminate the possibility of anybody going through what I went through. So no families. This
Right.
is just a straight up crew and holds 85 people. And we know that when they left on that last mission in the adversary, there was only 47 people on board. So half capacity, but still very
Right.
effective as a fighting ship.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I love the
Yeah.
Defiant. I will. I
Yeah.
think that's. I think these are the reasons that I love it because as much as the Enterprise is pretty, and there's a lot that you can do on it, and I feel like they could do whole seasons that were just about exploring different aspects of the Enterprise D because there are so many things that we never got to see on that ship. But
Sure.
I like the Defiant because it feels more like um, a more realistic, right, say for what you can say for a spaceship anyway,
Right.
but that kind of close quarters feel, everybody having to share, bunks. Even the crew quarters have bunk beds. They don't have individual,
Rooms.
lavish
Yeah.
rooms and things like that.
Yeah.
Everybody's
It's
on
true.
bunk beds and stuff, and everything's really close. Everybody can drop into position quickly, and yeah, I like that very efficient, streamlined feel to this ship that you don't have really in any of the other ships. Even
Right.
Voyager, which is supposed to be smaller, still had a lot more amenities on it than really I feel like it should have for such a small ship. But hey, whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's also, I mean, there were a number of things that changed this season. The biggest change was, again, we found out more about Odo and the Changelings, that the Changelings run the Dominion. The Dominion is the Dominion is a group of, it's like, I don't know if dictators is quite the right word. It's authoritarian. It's
Hmm.
a militaristic empire with that's controlled with the hand, like an iron fist. In part, and the reason for that is because the changelings say that they were persecuted in the past for being
Hmm.
changelings, and so their response to that is to basically control their environment by controlling the social and political and governmental structures of the Gamma Quadrant. So they're no longer a threat because now they're in charge, um, which is an interesting idea. The idea that, like, how could they have, I mean, it seems so obvious that with their ability to change in anything, that they could have just avoided detection. Um, how would people know you're a changeling if you're just able to, look like anyone around you? Now, of course, the answer is probably something defective. They're like Odo, where they had trouble, you know, pulling off the effect for a long time.
Hmm.
Odo is not perfect in his ability to replicate humanoids. Um, and they always present themselves in that kind of muted fashion whenever they are not fully looking like someone else.
Hmm.
Every time we have seen the changelings outside of them attempting to reproduce someone else, they have that same look like Odo does. But yeah, it's you feel sympathy for the changelings for that reason. Okay, they were persecuted, and this is how they're defending themselves by basically creating an empire. But
Yeah,
um, go
it's
ahead. Sorry.
definitely no, it's definitely fear gone amok here. I
Yeah.
mean, they even say when Odo first encounters them, they even say that they sent out several of their kind, like Odo, to meet with and interact with other peoples, other civilizations, because they have a
Right.
desire to learn and know people and things like that. But they also know from their own collective history that people feared them, and they
Right.
were not just persecuted, they were often they were killed, they were hunted, they were definitely mistreated in the most extreme of ways. And so what we see here is definitely the outgrowth of that fear that no one's ever going to accept us, no one's ever going to let us live equally peacefully because we are so different. So instead of trying to just suffer through and eke out some kind of meager except in somewhere down the line, they decided they were going to be more active and take control over how they were viewed. And it became, rather than us being fearful of others, we would rather them be fearful of us. So that's
Right.
kind of where the Jem'Hadar come from, and the use of the Jem'Hadar. And
Right.
from all accounts, though, this seems to work for everyone. There's a threat that if you don't do what they say, they will send in the Jem'Hadar. But if you do what they say, they pretty much leave you alone. It seems to
Right.
have worked out for several different species that we've come into contact with so far. No one
Yeah.
has any major complaints against the Dominion until the Jem'Hadar show up, which is okay. Well, what
Right.
were you doing that caused them to come in? Even
Yeah.
when we had the group, the Skreans, that came through the wormhole. Remember, and they were the group of wanderers. They were the farmers, and they were led by that. They were a female-led society, and the one lady that was kind of leading the charge there, Hanik. She was saying how her people had also been persecuted for a very long time until the Dominion came in. The Dominion eliminated those that had been oppressing Hanik's people, and that allowed for her people to escape
Right.
and to make their way, to attempt to find a new homeworld.
Right.
So so while we are beginning to see why the Dominion is a threat, for others the Dominion could have been a blessing. They could be seen as the liberators who freed them from other oppressors and allowed them the chance to thrive and to move about freely.
Right.
So I mean, there's history is obviously one of those things where whoever is telling the story is going to color it their own particular way, and as
Right.
we're beginning to see our own interpretation of the Dominion is different. But all I'm just trying to say here basically is that, I mean, we don't have the full picture of them just yet, and two, I think a case could be made for why what they did made sense, even if on the whole we don't agree with the end result.
Yeah, I certainly say there's a logic to it for sure. The real question, though, is, as you pointed out, if they were sending out young changelings like Odo into the universe, it seems like, wait a minute, you guys were upset because you guys were abused by, alien species, and then your response after having conquered one side of the galaxy is to send your young, inexperienced, blobby children to go experience that same trauma for themselves, basically, or like to make, like, to
Mhm.
learn about other species. Because I mean, like, the thing that Odo's trying to say and communicate is like, yeah, I experienced some of what you're talking about, the Cardassians and other things, the scientists who experimented on me. Yeah, there were some things that I have some trauma about that. But the Bajorans and the Federation and the people now, I'm in a better place now, and so don't just
Mhm.
come conquer us. Don't come conquer these people I have gotten to know, and they
So
don't like listen to him. It's interesting. They
well,
don't
so I
seem
would
willing to
see.
like. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you. I love this, but because this is one
Yeah.
of the things I love to talk about too. Like, uh, so to me, I would view it as, up until Odo started working with Starfleet and the Federation, his own experience was still one of trauma. Even when
Mm,
the Cardassians kind of elevated him to a certain point where he was doing security for them, it
right.
was security, but with a threat of, you know, we can kill you whenever we want. They did
Right.
not view him as an equal. He was a curiosity. He was a
Right.
plaything to a certain extent. The infamous Cardassian neck trick that they wanted him to do for them at any given moment. They didn't see him as a person. He didn't really
Right.
get that status until he started dealing with the Federation. So, and we don't know how long he was on Bajor, before he was discovered by Dr. Mora. He could have been anything, and
Right.
been kicked around a lot before they finally got him to someone who could effectively figure out a way to communicate with him. And so all of that is just to say that at the same time that Odo is just beginning to understand Starfleet and humans and Vulcans and all the rest of them, um, Starfleet is sending ships through the wormhole and making, contact with other races on the other side of the wormhole. And so if you're the Dominion and you've got your spies and listening posts out there, suddenly you're hearing whispers of this new alien power that's in the area that seems to be making some major headway in changing things. The Federation has made contact with several different planets all of a sudden and
Right.
has changed the way that they view their politics, how they treat their culture. They've freed a bunch of people who were on a prison moon. We don't know
Right.
what society that prison moon came from. Maybe that was something that was
Mm,
set up by the Dominion. All of a
right.
sudden, here comes the Federation with their technology and wiping stuff out. Like
Right.
there's so many different things that the Federation just blindly jumps into and affects in a very drastic way. That to the Dominion, who's been keeping the power and their form of peace for centuries, could
Hmm.
suddenly see this as a new threat. And
Right.
so that's why I think that their response was so sharp when it finally came, because it was, we need to put a stop to this encroachment now, because if the Federation is any indication, they're just going to keep coming. They're
Right.
just going to keep coming. They're just going to keep disrupting things. They're just going to keep changing things. We need to stop them now. And again, they did not know about Odo. They knew they had sent him out, but they didn't know he was just on the other side of the wormhole. They
Right.
didn't know anything about his experience. So by the time that they did learn about Odo, probably a lot of that stuff was already in motion.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Um, yeah. It's an interesting thing. I guess my point though is that if they sent Odo out so that he could basically be a scout of sorts to other cultures, when
Hmm.
he meets them in those first two episodes, that two-parter, um, their response isn't "let's learn from you and what your experience were." It was talking at him. Come join us. What the great?
Oh, the
What's
Great
the
Link,
what they did? Yeah, the Great
the Great
Link.
Link.
Which, like, on some level, it makes sense. Like, yeah, you're returning to your people. This is how we do things. Um, but let me put it this way: it seems I don't fully understand all of the nuances of why they did what they did, or at least the show hasn't done a good job of explaining necessarily all of the ins and outs of why they did it. I mean, of
Okay.
course, again, it's a show. Give it some time, or at the very
Yeah.
least, let it work its own self out. Um, but yeah, I mean, learning about Odo is great. I think it was last season where he turned into like that monster thing for a time, um
Hmm.
and so we know that he could be dangerous, but the real danger is actually, as we see in this season, that the fact that the changelings that are good at changing, they can appear as Romulans, they can appear as
Anything.
ambassadors for the Federation, and the last line of this season was, we're everywhere. Yeah, it's too late. We're everywhere. So yeah, it's fun. It's, as we talked about last episode, you can really take the horror element of this premise, and it's been done. So being a PG show, on television, they're not going to
Yeah.
go the horror route. But it's still a scary prospect. When, like, what does that mean? What things are we going to suddenly have to just start questioning anytime anyone comes aboard the station, anytime any sort of crisis or emergency or anything comes up? The question that always will be at the back of our mind is this because there's a changeling involved? There's the Dominion manipulating things behind the scenes. From now on, we can never know until it's revealed one way or the other. That goes for the Cardassians too. We haven't seen any Cardassians directly uh,
That's
revealed
true.
as a changeling. But the things with the Cardassians changed this season. We have peace with the Cardassians, like a true treaty that was negotiated
Yeah.
on the surface by Kai Wynn, but we know it was actually Vedic Bareil who did most of the heavy lifting.
Hmm.
Again, the character of Vedic Bareil, as we've said many times, we weren't a big fan of, but he did go out.
Let's we'll
He went
stop
out like
here.
a man.
We'll
Yeah,
stop
go
here and
ahead.
talk a little bit about Barral, because I know I've beaten him up a lot in
Yeah,
his run on the
right.
show. You're right. He did go out. I would say he went out in as strong a position as his character type could. He was committed to
Yes.
peace from beginning to end. He dedicated
Right.
himself to protecting others who were more vulnerable than he was. And even with his last actions, he ensured peace for his people. It is a
Right.
great, legacy that he left. I just always have felt like he would have fit in more with the next generation cast and crew than he
Right.
does with Deep Space Nine. And that's
Right.
because Deep Space Nine from the get-go has been a bit more of a hostile, combative show. And
Right.
Bareil is obviously a man of peace and born in peacetime too. So
Right.
I mean, he understands tragedy and loss, sure, but he has such an overwhelming, compassion for everything that it makes
Right.
him softer than everybody else that's around him. And
Right.
it really did make him stand out, and it just made him seem out of place when, if you think about it, he actually that's probably where you want people like him who
Right.
are so peacefully minded. You want him around people who are more hostile, more aggressive, more combative, because hopefully that peace and serenity that he has, he can, transfer and instill into others. And maybe he
Right.
would have in time. Maybe the effect that he would have had in time would be different. But I just always felt like he just seemed out of place. Him and Captain Picard probably would have been great friends and talked
Yeah.
ad nauseum philosophy and points of views
Yes.
and all that. They probably would have had
Yeah.
some interesting conversations. And watching that with those two probably would have been really interesting.
Right.
But for the people that we have on Deep Space Nine, it just didn't work.
Yeah.
Didn't
And
at
we've
least not to me. Not to me.
Yeah, I agree, and we've said it multiple times. At least I strongly felt like Kira was a bad match. I feel
Hmm.
like both of them were in love with the idea of the other person, and the real person was kind of lost in the mix there. And that's why I liked the character of Shakar, who was
Yeah.
the that was the name of the third to last episode in this season, when Kira went back to the planet on uh, Vedic, or I'm sorry, Kai Wynn's request, and she basically teamed up with her old um, freedom fighters, and Shakar
Mm.
being the leader. He immediately cuts out. I mean, let me put it this way: Shakar comes off with all of the great qualities that you could attribute to Vedic Bareil. He was calm. He was upstanding. He was anything you could say about Bareil, I feel like you could say about Shakar, but he also has a manliness to him, a willingness to
He was
fight,
Yeah, I
a
was gonna say
leadership.
he was quicker to action.
Yes,
He would listen to his people, sure, but
right,
you would not catch Shakar off guard. And
right,
we saw evidence of that when, Kai Wynn sent those two security officers to arrest Shakar.
right,
And he opened the door, he lets them in. He's very calm when listening to them and everything else. But he'd already made up his mind when they said they were there to arrest him. He'd already made up his mind as to what he was going to do
right.
and sprung into action immediately. He let them
Yes,
say their piece. He was respectful of that and everything else. But then he immediately launched into action, knocked him out, took his weapon, and even stopped for a moment to tell Kira, hey, this is not your fight. You can leave.
right,
This can easily be explained away. You don't have to
right,
come with me. So he was still even
right,
thinking of her in that moment. So yeah, I
right.
think that you're right. He has a lot of attributes that we could also say that he shared with Bareil, but he was definitely more a person of action than
Yes,
I feel like Shakar ever than Bareil ever was. In the
yes,
same situation, I feel like Bareil just would have gone with them. He would have
right.
allowed himself to be arrested and
And
hope that he would
and
have been able to talk his way out of it later.
And to be fair, I want to be fair to the character of Bareil. I feel like that is what his strength was, as we saw in the episode where he dies, where he basically, not through force of arms, but through force of will, wills himself through the he's dying, and he just basically like with uh, Dr. Bashir, there we go. With Dr.
Hmm.
Bashir's help, force of will lives long enough to make the piece happen. So I part of me wishes like the two characters could have just met. And I mean, I feel like Bareil would have acknowledged that Shakar, excuse me, was the better fit for Kira. But we never
Uh,
had that triangle moment. We never had the love triangle, which a lot of great storylines involve a love triangle, and we didn't have that here.
I
Um,
think I would have enjoyed that less.
Yeah. I mean, to be
I,
fair, it's an overdone plot line a lot of times, so it could have been
yeah,
overdone.
And especially
And
in this,
Kira has not expressed any love interest in Shakar, at least no direct thing. I'm the
yeah,
one putting that out there
that's
for to be
true.
very clear.
She hasn't said anything, but I mean, we picked up on the fact that it seemed like they were both little interested in each other. Barial, not Barial, but Shakar certainly seemed to throw that overture out a little bit more than Kira did, which would make sense because Kira was still grieving for Barial, so why
Right.
would she? But yeah, I don't think I would have enjoyed that watching that love triangle play out because that's the one that we see all the time. The dynamic
Yeah,
man
fair
action
enough.
versus the pacifist trying to win over the girl and
And it would have
yeah,
all come out the same way. The pacifist would have either died, as we
yeah,
saw. He dies and blesses the Union while he's dying
yes,
of the other
exactly.
two, or
Signs
or
up
the
on it.
or the hero dies. He died in some heroic action, and she finally realizes that it was actually the lover boy all along. It was
Which
the
it really wasn't.
peaceful.
It was just he was still there after the other one died. Like that's what it always
Exactly.
comes down to. And I think it would have
Okay, so
cheapened
we've told the
cheapened
story.
Kira.
We don't
Right. I think it
we
would have
don't need to
cheapened
we don't need
Kira. Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean that episode also had Kai Wynn, who the biggest change, it was actually last
Oh,
season near the end where
what a
Kai Wynn
segue.
became Kai. And man, she is just as devious as ever. I mean, she was more nuanced this season because there were times when she seemed to want to be better or do better, but then that self-serving, my child, all of the
Oh,
things you just hate about Win come out. I mean, she wasn't as aggressive about some of her being a jerk like she was like at the beginning of season two. Barial and Kira are walking in the gardens, and then above them on the bridge, Kai Wynn basically taunts them for a bit. Like we didn't have anything directly like that in such a blatant kind of just
what does she
crude
say
way.
there? She basically insinuates that Kira is a hooker.
Seducing him. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. She's yeah,
And that
she's
and that it's okay that Barial is entitled to recreation. Is
yeah.
what she calls. So basically, yes, that Kira is nothing more than a
A
fun
lo-
diversion from
yes,
from your real job.
exactly.
And I still think back to season one when we first meet Vedic Win. She was Vedic Win then, and we had the
Yeah,
whole episode with the school and Keiko O'Brien, and uh, O'Brien Miles was very upset, and he said something to Vedic Win. I don't remember what it was he said, but her response back sticks with me to this day, and it's one of those. It's one of those things that, like, every time I hear it, I just want to punch her in the face. And I love Louise Fletcher for it because she delivers it so well. But the
right.
line that she says is, "I feel your anger towards me, my child, and I forgive you for it."
Yes.
And I mean, I don't know what it is about that because it sounds so pleasant in a certain light, right? But you just
Right.
know, like a person who says something like that to you
Yeah.
is a bastard,
I
and
know
she
you're real
delivers it
mad that I'm
so
poking you right now, but I
right.
forgive you that you don't
Yeah,
like my poking you right now.
yeah. I know you're mad that my actions caused you to be upset, and I don't care.
Yeah.
There's just something about it, and I knew from that time on that she was just going to infuriate me in every scene that I saw her in, and she
Yeah.
does. Louise Fletcher did such a great job with this character. This is something that we get so much with a lot of the Deep Space Nine actors. They do such a great job with so little. Sometimes you can see why they come back. Mild spoiler, but Kai Wynn, Vedic Wynn, whatever you want to call her, was only in 19 episodes total of this show. 19. And the fact that she has left such an indelible mark on the show and has set
Right.
herself up as such a Karen, basically,
Yeah.
space Karen, in 19 episodes. It's
Kai
it's
Karen.
amazing. Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, great returning characters like this are just like, oh gosh, I always forget her name. The one, the Chalice of Ricks.
Luoxana Troy?
There you go.
Uh,
Just as I mean, of course, a very different character, but just as much an impression as a recurring character. Um,
I'm sorry, but now that I have to talk about Luoxana, I miss her. I do. I miss Luoxana Troy. I think she's great. Um,
We
I
had
miss
her
him.
in this season. She made an
I know.
appearance.
I know. Go ahead. Keep saying what you're saying. I just want to throw that in there real quick. I miss
Oh,
Martina
just yeah,
Graf.
they're great returning characters. There's Garrick. Garrick's a returning character. We learned a lot about Garrick this season. Um, he kind of briefly turned back to the dark side, though again, it was more like a coerced turn back to the dark side moment. Um, he
What a
bonded with
what a
Odo.
great little mini arc that we got there. I mean, we had the Romulan Tal Shiar teamed up with the Cardassian Obsidian Order, the greatest name for a
Yeah,
spy group ever. I don't
yeah,
think there can ever be anything that's going to top the Obsidian Order. Tal Shiar sounds cool, but come on,
yeah,
Obsidian Order. I mean, it
yeah.
just the name oozes mystery.
Yeah, Tal
You know,
Shiar is a bunch of nonsense lettering and it just comes out sounding cool, but Obsidian Order.
right? Even when you say it, it's just like, okay, what is this? And
Yeah.
it's great. We get to dive a little bit into Garrick's history, which we're never really sure what's the truth and what's a lie. I mean, we've done this a little bit before with
Mm,
Garrick when his little brain device was malfunctioning and he spun several tales for us. But now here we are yet again. But now we're meeting his spy master, the man whom he learned everything from, and that has is he Garrick's father? Is he not? Like, cause they clearly have a very close relationship here that seems to go beyond spy master and student,
right.
and even Odo says so when he's doing the investigation, which is leading them to the Obsidian Order. He even says to Garrick, "You guys were close, but there's something else there. You were closer than just spy master and student."
Right.
And Garrick knows his knows the Nabrantain's maid, long-term maid. He knows so many things about him. He knows where Nabrantain had a house that no one was supposed to know about, but Garrick knew, and yet had never told anyone. You know, and there was so much there that we get, and then of course we get to meet the very impressive Colonel Lovak, who turned out to be a changeling, but he was
Yes.
awesome for the little bit that we saw him in. Both of us,
Yes.
I remember being quite impressed with Lovak and his delivery.
Ah,
He was just fantastic,
yeah.
fantastic. Again,
Yeah.
and he wasn't even a recurring character. He was just a one-off special guest.
Ah, man, if he had been a returning character, that would have made the changeling reveal all the sweeter too.
Yeah, would
If
have.
we had got to know him a
Yeah,
little bit better. Yeah, the
he
actor
did
who played that character did a great job in those brief scenes we had him in.
another ER alum. He was another ER alum. So,
Yeah,
I, now that
yeah.
my now that all that is over with in my head, I know that I know that he was yeah, an ER alum. I'm trying to remember what the actor's name was who
Yeah.
played him.
Well, while you look it up,
Um,
I'll just keep talking about. Yeah, it was great to see the Odo Garrick bond at the end of that episode, or I guess it was a two-parter. The idea they're both kind of outcasts of a sort of their own species, of their own societies, and they bond at the end of that episode, which was great because Garrick is a character we had only ever seen with Bashir before. It was only Bashir. It was like it was just the two of them bumbling around doing stuff together, and then suddenly Odo is the one who's actually with Garrick. So that was good to see. Um, Speaking of Bashir, I don't feel like a lot happened with Bashir in this season. I mean, he's not quite the annoying
no,
jerk he was in the first couple seasons. He was just perfect at everything, kind of stuck up, obnoxious. He's definitely toned that down this season, which is nice. He and O'Brien now actually have a O'Brien doesn't hate Bashir anymore.
right? Yeah, he doesn't hate him.
Yes,
They're not friends yet. He just doesn't hate him.
right, exactly, and which is just hilarious. And he's gotten over Dax pretty well at this point. They're just mutual
They're
friends
good
now as
friends.
well.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of Dax, again, the show has not yet figured out what to do with her, and they even started kind of contradicting previous episodes with the whole, is she or is she not integrated with her past lives, her past selves, her previous hosts. The episode where we saw Curzon merge with Odo, that was fantastic. I
Fastic.
could I I want more of that. I wish we could have like a bajillion more of that.
So before we switch to Dax, I will say the actor who played Lovok was Leland Orser. Again, he's a ER alum, but he's also a Star Trek alum. He's played several different characters across the Star Trek spectrum. He
Yeah.
was on Deep Space Nine early in the episode Sanctuary, which I was just talking about earlier with Hanik and the Skreans. He was one of the Skrean males that she was with.
Oh,
Didn't even realize
okay.
it, but he was
Okay.
there. Obviously, he was Lovok, and then he was on Voyager as a holographic projection called Dejarin, and then he was on Enterprise as a kind of skeezy, corrupt blood bank operator named Loomis.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of a varied career there within Star Trek, as well as all the other things that he's played in, over the years. But yeah, still a great actor, and they keep bringing him back. That's another thing about these recurring roles; they can pop up in almost anything.
Right.
Um, so I would love to see some of these actors return to other Trek Trek
Right.
projects in the future. He would be one of mine that I would put on that list too to return.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
But now to talk about the curiosity that is Dax, because as you said, we have gotten a lot from Dax in this season, but at the same
Yes.
time, we've gotten very little. It's
Right.
weird. It's like we've got. I guess we've got a lot of nothing. Is the best way to
Right.
describe it. We had the episode Meridian where we get to see Jadzia Dax fall in love and contemplate leaving Starfleet and spending her life as a non-corporeal entity on this planet, which
Right.
ultimately fails because the Dax symbiote is one of those, you know, innocuous things that can't be converted the way that it needed to be for the plot of this episode. So
Right.
obviously it keeps Dax with us. So we get to see her fall in love and then, have to deal with that pain of the loss. A kind of a growing up moment for Jadzia and a learning experience for the Dax symbiote. Because we have to remember Dax, when the show first started, Dax is 28 years old. Counting her past lives, she's 328, but Jadzia herself is a 28-year-old woman coming onto the station.
Right.
Now, when we come to the episode of Facets, of course, this is where we see her take part in a trill ritual called the Jantara, in which she gets to meet with and interact with the previous hosts as their memories and experiences are transferred into the willing bodies of other individuals who've agreed to also participate in this thing.
Right.
So, yes, as you said, Curzon goes to Odo, and then the musician turned murderer goes to
Cisco.
Cisco,
Yeah.
Duran Dax,
Yeah.
and
That was another great scene.
these
Yeah.
are the two greatest characters that we barely saw anything of, and
Ah,
it's a shame. It's a damn shame because I
right.
mean, don't get me wrong, the others were interesting, but nothing can top the delivery of Renee and Avery Brooks here as their respective characters. They
Yes.
definitely just nailed it. And I don't know if it's
Yeah.
just I'm gonna start with Renee because I don't know if it was just seeing him be different from Odo and really seeing the range of Renee here that
Yeah.
made that such a special thing.
Yes.
But I mean, he really stood out. He really ate up all those scenes with
Yes. Yeah.
Jadzia and just gave us a stellar performance. As you
Right.
said, I loved Curzon. I would have loved to see more of this relationship with Curzon and her, and maybe if this had been a longer, drawn out thing where Odo was this Curzon merger for 2 or 3 episodes
Yes.
maybe, you know, and
Yeah.
seeing how that played out.
Right. Yeah. The whole he doesn't want to return his memories back to the symbiote. Um, yeah, that could have played out. The whole Cisco is now possessed by an evil murderer. That would have been a fun episode. But instead we just got glimpses.
I feel like that
But
could
it
have been
was
a really scary. Like if they really wanted to give us like homicide in space,
yeah,
that would have been a,
yeah,
a great one. Because then what do you do with at the end of the day? Like let's say that Cisco had escaped and like murdered some people, right?
right, yeah,
So
and
now
then he,
Cisco has the memories of murdering someone that he
yes,
has to deal with,
right,
and how do you prosecute that? You're prosecuting the memories, right, that go back to Jadzia.
Yeah.
So
Reminds you of this season one episode Dax, where that was part of the question actually. If hey,
exactly.
a previous
Yes.
host is the current host in some way responsible for a previous host actions. They have the memories. Does that mean that they have the responsibilities too? Um, yeah, I'm just it was a fun episode, but it was unfortunate because I think it was in season two where we had Jadzia talking with a recruit, a potential host,
Hmm.
and talking in like the third person. Jadzia this and Dax that, and then the whole point of that episode was to say that she was a combined person. She was all of these other hosts in one body. She was all of it at once. And then to find that the show has kind of retroactively gone back on that, and oh no, she still has questions for Curzon, even though she has his memories. Like, again, memories apparently of falling in love with her, you would think, as was revealed in this episode, which we agreed was kind of a like that. It kind of tripped
Yeah.
at the
It,
end. It fumbled
yeah.
the end of that episode. Um, but anyway, yeah, I mean, there's so many fascinating things about the idea of Dax, but it because it's hard to. It's not like they ever really truly sat down before they wrote down all of the stuff about Dax and really worked out all the kinks about how the trill work, what it
Yeah.
means to be a trill, and instead they're just kind of bumbling their way forward with her as a character, and that it shows. They have a hard time giving her good storylines, even lines. A lot of times, it seems like she barely gets a line in some episodes, and then when they do give her storylines, they also contradict each other. So
Yeah, it seems like they only really know what to do with Dax when they can make her operate within that capacity as a science officer. When they start to move beyond that and they're trying to talk about culture, personality, the effects of being a joined trill, they are all over themselves. Like, we know that Duran from an earlier episode where we talked about Jadzia having flashbacks and these kind of recurring memories and everything else, that Duran was joined as, he became Duran Dax, but it was a very short lived joining. And then the
right,
symbiont was removed from him after Duran was killed. So then Duran shows up in her Jantara. Well, what about the other guy who tried to steal the Dax symbiont? Remember
yeah,
when
that's
the
true.
station was working on the skeleton crew? What was his name? Um,
I forget, but that was season two. It was like episode four
yeah,
because it was right after that three-part episode. It opened up season two.
exactly.
Let me look at it
So
now.
he comes on,
Invasive procedures was the episode.
yes. And so he comes on board with the skeleton crew. He takes the symbiont out of Dax, puts it in himself. He now becomes a joined Trill. He has the memories, he has the experience, and everything else. Okay, well then where is he in the Jantara? He should have turned up. Some part of him should have turned up
Right.
in this process, but he doesn't. So it's
Yeah.
just like, okay, are you getting to pick and choose whose memories? Like there's no explanation for why he is not there. And if you
Right.
think about it, it's kind of conspicuous
Right.
because they went out of their way to put other people who were there who we'd never even seen before. Emily, Audred, I'm talking
Right.
about you guys, but at the same time, one that we did see not there.
And
So
that the actress who plays Jadzia, whose name escapes me for the moment,
Terry
um,
Farrell,
Harry Farrell said that guy, that actor who played that Trill who tried stealing Dax, the Dax symbiote, like she really liked working with him. Like it could have been a great callback to the character, even if the actor never returned. I mean, if she liked having him around for that one episode, you'd think she would have been like, "Hey, don't forget," But I don't know. Yeah,
that guy was. I've seen him in several different things too. I'm trying to remember what his name was as well, but he's been in Jonathan Glover. That's his name, and he's been
right.
in a lot of different things as well. And he was on um, Smallville. I don't know if anybody ever watched that show, um, but yeah, he was on that show for a while. He's just did a lot of different things, and I've always thought that he was a great actor, and I would have loved to see them give some kind of nod to him as well and have him come back
Right.
and do something else. But hey, it is what it is, I guess, at this point. But yeah, I still feel like there was just so much more with Dax that, like, while these things that we learn about the character are important, um, they don't do anything to move her along per se. And I guess like because as much as I love the character of Jadzia, I'm realizing more and more that it is for things that come later. So I guess I can appreciate what we see now because it does help form the basis for those later on things, and you can kind of forget them. Like, she went on the quest with Kor, Kang, and Koloth to kill the albino. Only her and Kor survived that, which is um, sad because Kang and Koloth are awesome. But yeah, we see bits of that about her. There's just so much about this character that I really just can't wait for us to get into, and we start that right away in season 4. So we'll be talking about that all really soon.
Mm. One
So,
last quick thing I wanted to say is that
yeah,
O'Brien, the biggest thing with O'Brien is Keiko was now on the planet and their daughter is with her. Um, I like Keiko as a character, but it feels like they needed to find a way to get rid of just the character because it's kind of a hassle to have him always like that's his thing is he's a family man, but we need to like free him up to do more things. So we gotta move his wife
yeah.
and daughter out off screen, and I feel like it's been a time since we've really last seen or heard from them actually. And the
So
last time it was even kind of a little awkward because they really got
yeah,
into like a marital fight there for a bit, and they made up, but it was kind
that was in the episode Fascination, and that was really Loaxana's fault.
of
Um,
yeah,
but I will say, so I've always believed that the reason that we see less of Keiko and family for a couple of
uh-huh,
different reasons. Number one, Rosalind Chow, the actress who plays Keiko O'Brien, she was quite busy. She did a
right,
lot. I mean, as I've already said, she was on ER a few times. She did a lot of other shows as well. And I'm just assuming that there are probably a lot of different scheduling conflicts. I mean, she
right,
had been kind of a recurring character on Next Generation. And then with the character of O'Brien being picked up for Deep Space Nine, I'm not sure that she was really ready to fully commit to being on the show. And then by the time that I think that she actually was ready, they were kind of like, well, we're moving in a certain direction here, and we don't
right,
really need to focus on Keiko as much. I
right,
also think that there was something to do, so there was more to do also with the popularity of the character. As we've said before many times, there were a lot of negative things said about Keiko for a long time. Even now, you will find people who don't like the character, don't like the way that she nagged Miles or whatever it was that she did, because, and I feel like there's a lot of lack of understanding of their relationship that attributes that. And a lot of that is hefted onto Keiko rather than onto O'Brien.
right,
Um, and then also, I think that they were trying to make a distinction between Cisco and everybody else. And Cisco was our family man. His wife
right,
had died, but he was raising his son. He was very committed to raising his son. And I don't think that they wanted to compete with Cisco's family dynamic with another family dynamic. So I think that's why there was this desire to kind of step away from that with O'Brien a bit and kind of make him a married man who's kind of living this weird lonely bachelor life. He misses his wife and child, so that's why he's so good at his job because he's throwing himself into his work. And then when his
right,
family shows up, it's great, whatever else, but we know it's short lived. And
right,
trying to give us that aspect of Federation Starfleet family life where one person may be in service while another one is not, and what that dynamic
right,
may look like is what we're seeing here. So a lot of different things they were playing with here, trying to make things right. But I do feel like the two main things were Cisco being the family man they wanted to focus on, and Rosalind Chow being extremely busy and unavailable.
gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I hope we see
No,
more of her, even if it's just glimpses. I mean, I'm not saying she has to become a main character, but
no.
I certainly don't
She
hope they
doesn't.
just like forget about her.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't go away. She's not
Good,
around. She's not
good,
around as much. But I think that in time, people will come to appreciate her, kind of like we do with a lot of the characters on the show. You might not have liked them initially when you first started your first watch, first run through, or whatever. But I think as the show progresses and with time, you will like these characters.
good.
Um, Now, before we end everything, there is one moment that we must talk about for season 3, which was absolutely amazing and is definitely important to character development here, and that is of course not Rom, Nog requesting to get the opportunity to join
Join
Starfleet,
Starfleet.
and then of course him taking the test, which now qualifies him to take the test to join Starfleet. But what a great moment that we have with Cisco and Nog in his office, and he kind of lays it out as to why he wants to be in Starfleet. And Aaron Eisenberg, once again, you know, great delivery, great scene. Him and Avery Brooks again were just top notch here, and I think it's one of the defining moments of Deep Space Nine. Like even with all the stuff that we haven't even seen yet, and what I could tell you about the rest of the show, I still feel like this is going to be one of those top five moments. I was going to say top 10, but I'm going to still put it up there in top five, probably even top three moments
Hmm.
of the show because it sets up so much for the show, but also for Nog and what we see happen to Nog throughout the course of the show. And it all stems from this moment right here. And it's deeply impactful. You definitely can't miss that scene.
Right. Yeah. 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 Again, I know a few things that Nog happened with Nog. I think we've talked a little bit about it. Like he gets a ship named after him, and he
Hmm.
defeats the Kobayashi Maru in his own way. I don't know all the details yet, but yeah, yeah, it's a great moment. It's hilarious. You know, Nog is placing all of his gold pressed latinum in front of Cisco, and Cisco refuses it, and it's a great little moment of like conflicting cultures. Actually, Nog is actually expressing respect to
Hmm.
Cisco by offering all this money. You know, that's a bribe, yes, on some level, but in his culture, that means a lot. Yeah, I'm giving you everything I have. That's how invested I am. I am giving it all to you. And for Cisco, I think he accepts it. He basically lets it just sit on the table. Of course, for Cisco, you know, money in the Federation is kind of a thing of the past, so it's not quite the bribe that maybe the Ferengi would consider it. But um, yeah, yeah, you're right. It was a great moment. Nog has been the troublesome student. Jake has been helping him learn, teaching him. They were having great bonding moments over a lot of that stuff, and it's paying off. Nog is
Hmm.
he's still an awkward studier. You know, he's still kind of jittery as he took those tests, but he proved himself, and hopefully we can. Well, I look forward to watching him grow and earn his stripes, as it were.
So yes, and he definitely does in a big way. He's got some great moments. There's another great one in particular that will be it's several seasons removed. All I'm going to say about that is it's him dealing with his own PTSD, and that's it. That's all I'm going to say. But it's great. It's a great episode. Aaron Eisenberg was a fantastic actor, and I mean, once again, he's just following along in a line of people who gave us spectacular performances and unfortunately are no longer with us. From again, Aaron Eisenberg, Louise Fletcher, Renee Auberjonois, Camille Saviola. These are all people who gave us great characters, great performances, impactful performances that continued to have a shaping framework, not just on the show that they were on, Deep Space Nine, but also well after their run on Star Trek was over, and the new shows are continuing to reference them. Heck, even the most recent episode of Star Trek Picard made a reference to Odo, and we even got to see a little picture of Odo on one of the
Really?
paths they were using. Yeah,
Huh.
so yeah, these guys they come up. You know, Discovery, we find out about Nog, and they named a whole line of ships after him. So, and or it's the ship is called the USS Nog, and it's the Eisenberg class ship.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
a double wink and a nod there
Mhm.
to the character. So, the character
Right.
and the actor.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean these. It's clear that they had an impact not just on the show they were on, but also on the people watching, and then the development of shows that came after them. So. Um, Basically all I want to say on that is, I mean, it's great to have these kind of things to remember them by, and they're obviously missed. And for those of you who don't remember, Camille Saviola was, of course, Kaiopaka,
Mm.
who left us after the first season, actually. So,
Right.
well, we are coming right up on it, but before we end it out, I did want to give a brief update about New Trek. As we said last week, Star Trek Discovery has announced that the fifth and final season will air in 2024. Star Trek Picard has just released its fourth episode, but by the time our podcast version of this episode releases, the fifth one will be out as well. It's 5 of 10. That'll be 5 of 10 episodes total.
Wow.
There, and then that's it. So that's supposedly that's it. Now there has been talk of a lot of different, potential spin-offs of characters and things like that as certain storylines have taken off and characters have gained popularity and so forth. Really, that's going to come down to what actors are going to be available to do it. I mean, I think as much fun as a lot of them are having, we do have to recognize that there are limitations on people's age. I mean, again, Patrick Stewart's 82 years old. I think Jonathan Frakes is in his 70s, and Michael Dorn in his 70s and so forth. So, seeing them run shows again, I don't know if that would actually happen. The Section 31 show, I'm going to go ahead and call it dead. I just think that it's dead. It's been in development for the past like 6 years. Michelle Yeoh's star power has risen exponentially, so I'm sure there's going to be a financial issue there. I don't think that show's ever coming out, and if it does, more power to her. But I just don't
Right.
think it's going to happen. The
Yeah.
two things that seem to be to beat right now would be a show focused on Starfleet Academy, and then there's something else that may be a spinoff of Picard, which they haven't really talked much about, but some kind of spinoff there. But other than that, nothing. Lower Decks and Prodigy are set to return as well in later of this year, 2023, but we will see. But
Yeah.
that's it. That's it. That's
Yeah.
where we are. Any final thoughts, David, before we close this out?
Well, looking forward to season 4.
Any projections? Anything that you want to see in season 4? Yeah, give me one. One thing you definitely want to see in season 4, and one thing you definitely do not want to see in season 4.
What I want to see is I want the Cardassians to have to. I want them to be in a crisis of some kind as a culture, primarily because of the Dominion. Like the Dominion has infiltrated their government and is causing all kind of havoc. The changelings are in there. There's a problem. Gul Dukat comes on his knees begging for help. That's what I want. That's what I want.
Okay. Okay.
And then what I don't want, what I want is I want Kai Wynn to be humiliated, which means I don't want her to succeed. Yeah, but anything with Kai Wynn getting a comeuppance, that's what I want.
Okay.
Not just
Well,
skated by, got out of it in the last second. I'm not going to be the first minister, because I'm going to endorse the truly popular candidate. I want her to
okay.
get it to the face, get a take it on the chin. There you go. That's what I want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we will be back to talk about all of that in 2 weeks, and we'll actually be doing a special for the beginning of season 4. There will be more of us that you get to listen to as we go over the opener of season 4. Now, again, I said 2 weeks because next week we'll be doing our Trek After Dark special, in which we talk about all things The Expanse. So, for those of you who have been following along either with the show or the books or both, just be ready for us to do our own little deep dive there
Right.
on book 3 of the series. Okay. And it's going to be all about The Expanse and how it relates to Deep Space Nine and some other shows that we really like. And because we finally got there, that we can talk about all those things as well. So then that's next week. And then the week after that, we will be back with season 4. Okay.
Right.
And so hopefully by then, all of our stuff will also be up and running. Won't be having any Twitter issues amongst other problems. Okay. So yeah, just catch us back here. And until next time, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.